two writers, one just starting out, the other a bestseller. Join James Blatch and Mark Dawson and their amazing guests as they discuss how you can make a living telling stories. There's never been a better time to be a writer.
Hello and welcome to the Self-Publishing Formula Podcast with Mark and James on a Friday, and once again we could say a sunny week in the UK. In fact, as we speak, I'm going to be in the air on the way to Los Angeles, so surely guaranteed sunshine.
Get you.
Though that would be ironic, wouldn't it? We come from rainy old England. I'll get to LA. It's warm in England this week, and I'll get to LA and it'll be pouring with rain. Like in that scene from LA Story where Steve Martin does the weather forecast in advance. Because it's LA, what could possibly go wrong?
Exactly. No, I'm sure you'll have lovely weather, but if on the off chance that you didn't, then no sympathy really.
Well, here's the sympathy I need. I'm going to have to get up at 5 a.m. on Sunday to watch England versus, not Belgium. Who are we playing in our middle match? It's Tunisia tonight.
Panama.
5 a.m. Got to be done.
See this? YouTube watchers or people watching on YouTube, I just got out the world's smallest violin.
I'm doing a quick job in LA and a quick job in New York and then coming home. So I'm basically doing America in a weekend.
Then go back to America.
And then back to America for our big soiree in New York, which I'm really excited about, going to Thriller Fest. I hope it's going to be genuinely thrilling.
Well, yes, I'm sure it will be good. There's lots of excellent speakers, not including me. Yes, take your microphone and your recorder, and we'll see if we can get some big names on the podcast.
Good. And I've got a couple of long haul flights to write my book on, which is good.
There you go. No more excuses.
No more excuses. I'm cracking on with it now. Okay, good. We're going to talk about a couple of things this episode. We've mentioned Cockygate before, so let's have an update from that. And I know we're going to talk in a minute about the fact that we're hoping to do an episode, but it is quite legally fraught, and we've spoken to a couple of people already, but unless we've got all sides, and also our lawyers are happy that we're not going to impinge on any ongoing court cases, we can go ahead with it. I have to say, where we're standing at the moment, it's extremely unlikely we're going to be going ahead with that episode. It's just too legally fraught at the moment. And it might be, as it turned out from one of our interviewees, a year and a half's time before we get some of the resolutions in this case. But that doesn't stop us addressing this issue. And Mark, I know you've already hinted at this. You're the well-published author in our relationship here. And I know you're pretty upset about the prospect of trademarking a single name.
Yeah, I just don't think it's a very good idea. So we obviously, we don't need to go over it in too much detail, but we started with, in fact, we didn't even start with Cocky. There were people who've been trademarking single names before that. Lit RPG was one. I think we've had Rebellion was one that was going on at the same time. Space Marine was another one that Games Workshop in the UK tried to trademark and had trouble with. Then, of course, Cocky came along and brought the whole thing kicking and screaming into the light of day. And then since then, there've been some that I just kind of shake my head about. We've had Dragon Slayer, Tamer, what else have we had? Destroyer, and then most recently the word big. Someone is trying to trademark the word big. And this, this can only really be people doing it to get a rise out of other people. I mean, certainly in that last situation, I just can't understand why someone would do that. From my perspective, it's not something that I would do. I just don't really understand that. Let's also just back up a bit. We have done it before when it comes to Mark Dawson's self-publishing formula. So we have a trademark for that, not for Mark Dawson, although I suppose I could seek to trademark my own name, not for self-publishing, obviously, and not for formula, but that collection of 5 words there that we have invested tens of thousands of dollars into, and we've built up a little brand for ourselves. We have protected that. So if someone else in the States, for example, set up Mark Dawson's self-publishing formula, we would be able to enforce a trademark against them. Would I do it with with John Milton thrillers? No, I don't think I would. I certainly wouldn't with single words. So I do find it troublesome. And I've spoken to some of the parties involved here, and this isn't something that I can really get my head around. So slightly worrying. I think it will all come out in the wash, and the resolution of this particular case, I think, will go some distance to clarifying things. But at the moment, just all a little bit silly from my perspective.
Yeah. And I think it's worth pointing out, so in a mix, people's anger at what's happened, and there is a lot of anger flying around about this. Some people might also be thinking, a little part of them might be thinking, should I be doing something to protect my books? So the conversation you've just had, the thought process you've just gone through is a very useful guide on this, because you're a very successful author. Your income, if your author income went tomorrow, it'd be devastating for you and your family, and therefore you're wholly interested in it. And yet you're not going to trademark quite a lot of aspects of your book because you don't feel it's necessary. And that, I had one of the conversations I had was with Kevin Newper, who's involved in all of this, and he pointed out that there is common law. So for instance, you might or may not remember this, about a year or so ago, somebody launched a self-publishing course called the Self-Publishing Formula. Was it deliberate or was it an accident? I don't know, but we just wrote to them and they immediately said, oh yeah, okay, sorry, and they changed the name to something else. We didn't need a trademark of Self-Publishing Formula to do that. And had that person not relented straight away, we wouldn't have had too much problem going to any kind of legal environment to establish the fact that that was our IP. You don't always need an actual trademark. It's for logos more than anything else. And the adoption of your very specific name in a very specific industry.
Yeah, partially right. I mean, we would have, in this country at least, I can't speak on US law because I've never studied it, but in this country, there's a concept called passing off. So if someone tried to pass off their work as mine so that it would confuse my readers that I have another book out and it's not been written by me, somebody's basically attempted to piggyback off my reputation. There are ways that I can prevent that from happening without having to have a trademark. Copyright is also relevant in this as well. So there are weapons that we can use without going to the expense and controversy now of getting a trademark for something that isn't, I think often it isn't really, people are getting trademarks in a way that was never what was intended by trademark legislation. So,
yeah,
okay. it's all a bit weird, but I think it will wash out in the end.
Yeah, hopefully. And it's part and parcel of this industry being an immature industry, and it's finding its way, and some of these decisions that are being made now in the courts will set things out for the future. So if we have interviewed you on this subject, I do apologise, but it's unlikely that we're going to be able to broadcast any of that anytime soon. So we'll just, like everybody else, watch Twitter and see what unfolds. Now, on a much happier subject, we have two things to say. One is that we've got literally the last few days, if you're interested in our Ads for Authors course, because we close up in the next 7200 hours, something like that. And that will be at least until late 2018, possibly early 2019. We've been delighted with the response that the course has had this time, really delighted. We've had lots of interest and lots of people coming on board, and it's very exciting to see people getting stuck into the course. And so that's exciting. So I think officially it's going to close at midnight, wherever you are, midnight, on Wednesday the 27th of June. So for UK, that's sort of 8 a.m. Thursday morning, but if you're in the Pacific Islands, Easter Islands, something like that, it's about midnight. And then that'll be it. And we'll get on with shepherding those students through the various complexities of the course. And what is the result of getting things right? Well, that's what this interview is about today. In fact, it's about two things. One is the focus and concentration needed to get your writing done, which is apposite for me. And also just how getting this right, this self-publishing business right, can unlock a lifestyle that you didn't dream of before. Our interviewee is a man called Kam Knight, lovely guy from Chicago in the US. And Kam has had, that transference from the 9-to-5 droll 9-to-5. He was an accountant, I think, of all things. Not to be too rude about accountants, but it's not an industry you can dress up with excitement.
Not droll, dreary, perhaps.
Dreary, yeah, droll's the wrong word. And then he unlocked this, and since then he has had the most incredible travelling lifestyle. It's a really, really lovely interview, and and also useful, particularly on the concentration and focus thing. And we do have a very useful guide for you to give away. I'll tell you the URL now ahead of the interview. It's selfpublishingformula.com/focus, FOCUS. And I, for one, am going to be downloading that PDF and applying it. But for now, let's hear from Kam. Kam, with your big professional microphone, there. Welcome to the SPF Podcast. Always good to see a good microphone. And I think we're talking to you today from Chicago, your home, but really this interview is about how you've used self-publishing and writing to fulfill your wanderlust.
Yes. So I'll just give a little bit of a background about myself. I'm Kam Knight, and I'm a self-published author. And I've been writing for about the past 10 years, and I've written about 10 books. And then about 7 years ago, I became a full-time author. I quit my day job in October 2011. And about 2 months later, in December of 2011, I started traveling. And since then, I've traveled to nearly 100 countries as a self-published author. And, I didn't just travel to big cities and top tourist destinations. As one of my friends had lamented, you really left no stone unturned. And really, I didn't. I've camped in Timanagara, the world's oldest rainforest, hiked the second largest glacier ice sheet in Greenland, spent the night over numerous active volcanoes, whether it was in Indonesia, Ethiopia, or Nicaragua, slept in the deserted islands of the Sandblast in Panama, rode a camel in the largest desert in the world in the Sahara, and did game drives in the savannas of Africa. So I was able to do all that as a self-published author.
Wow, amazing. Okay, well, let me take you back a little bit to the beginning part. So you started writing, you were working. Sorry, what was your career? What was your job before?
So my background is in accounting and computer programming, and I was a successful accountant and programmer for several years. Then, like many people listening to this podcast, at a certain point in my life, I had an itch to write. And it was an overpowering itch, one I couldn't resist. And even though I wasn't a native English speaker and writing was my weakest subject, it was just something that was calling for me and just something I had to do. And so I stuck with it until I got better at it. And then, the self-publishing platform with ebooks came around the time that I was writing. So it was just a really good option for me to go that route as a self-published author.
So you say English isn't your first language. What is your first language?
It's actually Hindi.
Okay.
From India, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, so you've already done a bit of traveling. I mean, just to end up being an accountant in Chicago. Very much a sort of global citizen, I guess, of today's generation, more so than my parents' generation, more likely to be growing up in a country where they weren't necessarily born. And do you think that part of your early life has fed into your desire to travel and see more of the world?
I think it might have, because we did do a little bit of traveling when I was a kid. But I think traveling is it's for people who are just very curious and open-minded and really want to explore more than what they have in their hometown. And so since I was a kid, I was always exploring. I was always trying to cross my neighborhood, even though my parents didn't want me to, and just trying to see what was out there. And so it was something that I've always had as a child. And then somehow I became an accountant, which I felt like wasn't, didn't allow me to explore the way I was. And then when I got into writing, I just felt like it allowed me to do that because all I needed was really a computer and an internet connection. And I was able to write pretty much from anywhere. And as a self-published author, it's easy to get yourself published these days on Kindle and other platforms. And again, all you need is an internet connection to be able to do that.
And what did you start writing?
I started writing first in the personal development genre. So I was writing books about tools that I was using myself, like self-talk and visualization and goal setting. And the reason I started writing in that is because, there's a lot of cool tools out there that can help you perform better. And I just felt like they weren't being explained well, or they weren't being taught in the best way. So when I started writing, I was trying to fill a gap in the material that was out there. And so my earlier stuff, thanks to the Kindle platform, did quite well. Mainly because I had, like I said, I got into writing about 10 years ago. And at that time, nobody was on the Kindle platform. And so if you wanted a book on a topic that I had written, it was the only book available. So just for that, it did well. And I can't say I was a great writer at that point. I mean, I was still learning the ropes. At the time, there weren't no Mark Dawsons and others teaching people how to self-publish. So all the learning curve was on your own. But I was really glad that I put some of my earlier stuff up there, because when you get like success, when people are buying your stuff and you get positive reviews, it just kind of motivates you to continue doing it. It validates you, and you start feeling like, okay, I'm a writer now.
Yeah, and that's definitely an advantage of being an early adopter. And we have quite a few people on the podcast who started at around that time. Even if you started as late as something like 2011, 2012, you're still in that early tranche. And getting visibility perhaps easier than today. But that's not to say that if you don't get that immediate success today, that should be the end of it. You do have to persevere. But I can certainly see the advantage of getting some positive sales and reviews early on.
Right. I do encourage everyone to persevere, because if it is a passion, then it really opens the doors for you in what you can do, not just in your career, but in your personal life. And I just want to comment on, what you said about even if you got in at around 2011 or 2012. I mean, even 2012, it was really huge. I remember around that time is when KDP Select came out. And back then, you could set a free promotion for a book and get thousands and thousands of people to download your book. I remember I did a KDP Select back in maybe November of 2012. And I had a book, and this was no marketing and no BookBub. I must have gotten over 20,000 downloads.
Wow, that is incredible. And I think Mark had a good experience in those early years as well, where it suddenly all took off for him. So they were the self-help books early on. And have you continued with that? Have you moved into fiction?
No, I haven't moved into fiction. I went more into mental performance. I write more on improving memory, enhancing concentration, mind mapping, and things of that nature. I haven't dabbled much in the fiction realm yet, and I think your audience really is majority fiction, correct?
Yeah, I think so. Although, it's a very common question we get asked every day of the week by people from our audiences, how do I market nonfiction? And it's an area we're very interested in. SPF is a nonfiction organization. It's something we think about a lot. So it is an area we're moving into more and more nonfiction. Yeah.
And I suspect down the road, there'll be a lot more nonfiction authors buying your course. And I mean, I've been following the podcast, and I'm getting a lot of good information, even though I'm a nonfiction author. There's a lot of information that's very helpful. I think you guys did a podcast, I think it was podcast 85 with Katie Cross, talking about imposter syndrome. And I think imposter syndrome is much bigger for nonfiction authors, because we're giving people advice. And a lot of what we deal with is, who am I to give this advice? Or, why do I feel like somebody should listen to me? So imposter syndrome is huge. And I know you guys did a recent podcast about reviews, and we all experience negative reviews. And so I think a lot of what you're doing is very helpful for nonfiction, and I could see more and more people coming to you guys. So it'd be another avenue.
It's good to hear. Thank you, Kam. And so we should talk about the rewards of getting this right. In your case, you wanted to travel. You had this lust in your mind, and with the best will in the world, 20 days annual leave as an accountant probably not going to cut it in terms of quenching that. So this has been a fantastic release for you.
Well, in the States, you'd be lucky if you get 20 days. You get 10 days.
That's incredible. We get like 25 kind of normal in the UK. But so even so this has been an incredible opportunity for you to change your life and do and see things and experience things that you could only have dreamt of a few years ago.
Right. And Yeah, speaking of imposter syndrome, if you have imposter syndrome in one area of your life, more than likely it's going to translate into other areas. And for me, it went into the area of travel because when I was first traveling, I was experiencing some amazing things. Scuba diving with hammerhead sharks in the Galapagos Islands, or swimming with a 10-meter long whale shark in the Bay Islands of Honduras. And at one point, I was like, what did I do to deserve this? Why do I feel like I should have that? And there was some self-sabotage going on at that time as well. Like my mind was going, okay, now it's time to stop. You've experienced so much. And, just the way we're raised, we're felt to feel like maybe this kind of life isn't meant for us, or it's too much, or we're being selfish. But, if you have the opportunity, why not take it? And because writing afforded that opportunity, I really went for it. And when these moments came up of the imposter syndrome or the self-sabotage, I really had to work to make sure that, I wasn't going to let it stop me. And so in the early part of my journey, at the month 6 mark and the month 12 mark and at the month 18 mark, I was feeling a lot of that, like, okay, you've done enough. It's time for you to go back. You've experienced life enough. But then I was just like, well, I'm just going to see how far I can take it. And I just kept going until I actually wanted to stop, not because I felt like I needed to stop.
Yeah, that's incredible. And it's so true. It's amazing how far this self-sabotaging mindset goes. I mean, I get it just going to the cinema. If I sit in the cinema, I start to feel kind of guilty that I'm there and I should be doing something else. It's crazy mind stuff going on. But I think Mark gets the same thing, and as you say, and you book a nice flight and you want to go somewhere and you do have this sort of vague nagging feeling that you shouldn't be doing it. And I would love to get rid of that 100%. Can you help me with that?
I give you permission to enjoy your life to the fullest extent as possible.
Permission granted.
And the reason I say that is because I feel like we're waiting for somebody to give us permission. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. We're waiting for someone to say, okay, this is okay for you to do. And I'm letting everybody listening to this podcast and yourself know that, you have permission to do this.
Permission granted from Kam. Thank you. That's great. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the travel, because you've listed off some incredible things that you've done. What have been your highlights? Well, I guess what you've listed off has been the highlights, right?
Yeah, I mean, you would think, but I think what you experience out in the world, how I would equate to art or music. Like, is there a particular song that you really, really like, James? Ooh. I would suspect that you have a favorite song, but there's not just one song that you could say is your all-time favorite. And art is such that, and I've explored a lot of art when I was traveling, and that's why I'm saying this, is that no one experience could ever top another. There's so many unique experiences that you will experience when you're traveling, and you'll get to a point where you'll be like, wow, I can't imagine anything topping that. And a month later, I had something to top that. And a month later after that, I had something to top that. So, experience is such that there isn't one thing that you could say is the best. But if I were to narrow it down, I would say when I was scuba diving in the Galapagos Islands. And it was amazing because it was straight out of a underwater documentary that you would see maybe on the Planet Earth TV documentaries or whatnot. I mean, there were just schools of fishes everywhere. There were spotted rays, other manta rays. There were sea turtles, giant ones. And if that's all that I had seen, I would have been, very much satisfied. But then, 5 minutes later, we were at a coral wall, and all of a sudden, it must have been like an invasion of hammerhead sharks that came over the coral wall. And hammerhead sharks glide in the water like they own it, because they're on the top of the food chain. And the way they glide looked like they were bombers that were coming overhead. So we had about I couldn't count, maybe 9 or 10 hammerhead sharks that came over the coral wall. And hammerheads and most sharks, they're a very curious creature. And although they know, humans aren't something they want to eat, but they're really curious. So they'll just like swim like that, they just like come up to you. And we had those sharks and a bunch of other sharks kind of swimming around us. And it was such an amazing experience. And I remember getting back on land thinking, wow, I can't imagine anything topping that. But then after I left the Galapagos, I was in Ecuador and I saw a sign for a tour to the Amazon, and it was a great price. It was like $250 for a 4-night, 3-day, or a 4-day, 3-night excursion into the Amazon, where we saw 6-meter long anacondas, a whole host of monkeys like spider monkeys, and we went piranha fishing, we did night hikes, we saw alligators. I mean, it was just incredible. So that's really been kind of my life the last 6 years.
Yeah, you spent quite a lot of time near some fairly dangerous creatures, not the hammerhead sharks, but the piranhas and anacondas and so on. You must have had a few moments here and there as well along the way that weren't necessarily straightforward for you.
What do you mean by that, straightforward?
Well, what I mean is you were scared. Did anything get hairy at any point? Have you feared for your life at any of these moments?
It was weird. When I was, around 6 years ago, I was a bit arrogant, I guess, and I didn't have so much fear back then. But now when I look back at it, I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I do? I mean, I shouldn't have been too ambitious. And so, at the time I wasn't too scared. I was just like, whatever the world had to offer, I was just so excited to experience it and just go out and do it. And for some reason, I figured if, these tour companies are taking people out there, there must be some sort of safety to it. So I just kind of trusted the universe for everything to go smoothly.
Yeah, and it did. Okay, so when you were doing this traveling, was this a bit like holiday traveling in that you were based in Chicago, you'd look for your next trip, you'd book it and you go on it? Or did you just sort of set off and go from one place to another?
Yeah, this wasn't holiday traveling at all. I rarely came back to the States, so I was just moving from one spot to the next. So I had started my journey in Colombia, and I had worked my way up through Central America into Guatemala, and then I went back into South America, and then I explored all the countries over there. And then I flew out to Asia, and then to Australia, New Zealand. And then I went to Africa, explored pretty much most of South and East Africa. Came into Europe and did pretty much most of the countries out in Europe. And when I had done all the continents, I just kind of was going back and forth. I went back into Africa, came back to Europe. And yeah, so it wasn't vacation at all. It was just me being on the road the whole time, living pretty much a completely nomadic life.
You must have spent a lot of time sitting in high consulates and embassies queuing for visas.
As Swiss, American, British, we're very fortunate because we have a very strong passport. So I think it is one of the strongest passports that allows us to get into the most countries. So luckily, visas weren't too much of an issue, but I was standing a long time at border crossings to get my stamp into the country.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, I used to do a bit of traveling for the BBC, and in the end, I worked out that the worst thing you could do, particularly Africa, I noticed, the worst thing you could do is apply for anything. The best thing you can do is turn up off the aeroplane with your passport, and you always get in. But
exactly.
once you start the application process, it never ends for some of those countries.
Yeah.
But I'm incredibly jealous. I mean, I think that it's one of those things that most of us have lives that don't easily allow us to be away for long periods of time. Because there'll even be self-published writers listening to this who've got children to get to school in the morning and back home in the evening and so on. And I guess, I don't know, I haven't asked you if you're married or you got kids.
No, I'm not married and I don't have kids, luckily, but I have met quite a few people who have traveled as a couple and who have even traveled with kids. So I don't want people to think that you have to be single to enjoy a life like that. And it can be actually more advantageous if you are with somebody, because being on the road alone, there were times where I was kind of on my own for an extended period of time. And if you're traveling as a couple or even with kids, that can be, a safe respite from those periods.
And when you've been away, have you continued to run your writing and publishing career?
Yes, I was very much into it, especially in the first couple of years of my journey. I was still writing and I was still focused on getting my work out there. And, it was like I had mentioned, I was quite lucky that I was able to get into the Kindle platform quite early. So at that time, really all you had to do was like publish the book and you would get some sort of sales. And if you tweaked your keywords and used the KDP Select at that time, you could really generate a lot of sale. So I was very fortunate where I didn't have to do too much marketing, but I was still writing quite a bit. And I think the first 3 years I still wrote at least 2 or 3 books during that time.
Okay. So you're doing that on the road, a little laptop, and every now and again find an internet connection and do a bit of marketing and tweaking.
Yes. And you'd be surprised, but internet connection is very strong all over the world, even in second and third world countries, even in places where you would think there would be no internet connection. But this globalization has been really huge in the last 10 years, and there's almost no place where you can't find internet connection. In fact, a few years ago, I was in a taxi in Peru, and the guy's like, if you need Wi-Fi, I've got Wi-Fi in this taxi. And I was shocked. I'm like, that's crazy. So yeah, you'll never be without an internet connection. And because you'll never be without an internet connection, you always have the opportunity to work, tweak your marketing and whatnot. And if you are out of an internet connection, that's great, because then now you have time to write.
Yeah. And that's a blessed sign as well. Where are you now with your writing? So have you effectively stopped producing new books now? Or?
Well, when I returned to Chicago a few months ago, I had decided that I was going to end my travels for a little bit. And at that time, I had written 8 books. And so in the last 6 months, I've been working on 2 more books. One book on concentration and another one on speed reading. And I'm almost done with those 2 books. And I think I will have about 10 nonfiction books. And I feel like that's enough. I didn't focus too much time and energy on marketing. The last 6 years I was traveling. And so this now is where I really want to get more into the marketing. And this is really how I discovered self-publishing formula and some of the other guys who are in this field.
Good. Well, look, let's talk a little bit about the focus stuff, because that's something, funny enough, we're mid-course launch at the moment. I've just spent an hour working on my book, and I was supposed to do that this morning, and it's taken all day, and to the point where I thought I've just got to start doing this. And I do find it difficult to knuckle down when there are so many distractions on at the moment. And I think this is an area that you've been thinking about a bit.
Yeah. Well, when you're on the road, you have a lot of downtime, when you're waiting for flights at the airport, when you're on long bus rides. A lot of my travel was on overnight bus journeys. And in between those times, there's the best time for writing, at least for me. I find when I'm doing something completely outside of just sitting in front of a computer to write, that's when I get my best ideas. And so I've always had my phone on me, and I always have a trusty app where I can write on. Right now I'm using Evernote because it allows me to sync across desktop and my phone very seamlessly. And so anytime I have a good idea or anytime I have downtime, that's when I'm writing. Even if I'm just on the metro for a little bit, I'll get a lot of good writing done in those times. And, when I think back about it, really, a lot of my writing was done on downtime. So I wasn't spending too much time, I have to sit down for a few hours or for a few days and pump out X amount of words, because I was doing so many other things. So where it was really helpful for me was to be able to use the downtime I had and make sure I used it wisely and got a lot of stuff done. And it seems on the surface, oh yeah, common sense, of course, use downtime. But downtime are those times where you don't want to write. And so you really have to condition yourself to be able to get yourself to pull out your phone or pull out your laptop when you're not doing something and start writing. And once you've conditioned yourself, it starts to become pretty easy. So by around year 2 or 3, I mean, it was fairly easy for me to put words out onto paper and get things published.
So you made it a kind of habit rather than a chore, just a part and parcel of what you did. You got on the bus, got on the plane, sat down at the terminal, whatever, waiting, laptop out. Yeah,
and I'm glad you used the word habit, because I did make it a habit. Because now I can, when I have downtime, because it's a habit, it's just so natural for me to just pull out my phone and just take some notes on some ideas I had, or just write until I get to my destination or the downtime is over. And as I mentioned, that's really where I get some of my best ideas, when I'm not focused on trying to get my best ideas. Do you know what I'm saying?
You do give yourself more opportunity to have good moments writing and good moments thinking if you just do it a lot.
Yeah. Right.
I think it's a really important point. So you've come up with a book on this subject, right? So how's the book structured? What are people going to get out of that?
On the subject of concentration?
Yeah.
It's actually the book on concentration that I'm almost finished with. I've taken everything I've learned in my journey as traveling, as well as writing and in other areas, and everything I've learned about the mind and how it works. And it goes really deep. It goes deep into our thoughts, the things that distract us internally, like our thoughts, our mental images, our feelings, our impulses, and but one, being aware of it, being aware that we have so many internal distractions that are going on. And the fact that we're not aware of it is where it gets all of its power. And once we become aware that we have all these internal distractions, and we know how those internal distractions will come up and how they will take us away from what we're trying to do, we have a lot more power to manage and handle them. And then another part of the book focuses on techniques that you can use to just be much more focused and much more honed in on what you're trying to do. And if it's writing and if it's marketing, it can really help somebody get a lot more work done in a lot less time, because a lot of that internal distractions that we have aren't getting in the way. And I believe when it comes to concentration, majority of our distractions are internal. I mean, we do have external, but those external distractions really affect our internal ones first. And if we can manage all those things that are going inside of us, it's much easier to manage the external distractions.
Yeah, that sounds really good. So where are you in the publishing process with this book?
I've just finished the first draft of it,
okay,
and I'm working on the second draft, and I'm hoping to get it out to an editor and hopefully be done with it by the end of either June or July.
Okay, so soon. We'll look out for that. And Kam, I think you very kindly agreed to put together some helpful hints and sort of PDF that people can take away from this interview. Is that on the subject of focus and concentration?
Yes, it's entirely on helping other authors and writers get more focused on being able to write more in a shorter period of time.
Okay, so I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll, as always, I come up with these URLs off the top of my head, but let's call it selfpublishingformula.com/focus, FOCUS. That's a nice simple word. And we'll liaise after the interview if you get that stuff to me. And then I think if you can make sure on that PDF people know how they can follow you. And I mean, are you a big social media guy, Kam? Can people, when you're abroad, people follow these amazing events from you?
Yeah, I do have a social media, but it was really, and I have a lot of pictures that I put up, and a lot of stories behind it. But I never really put it out to the public. It was just for a lot of the friends I was meeting and, my friends back at home. But if people in your audience are interested, I could set that out there and maybe put that in my book and give them a link so they can see a lot of the cool, amazing things that is out in the world that they too can experience.
Well, I know that I'd love to see it, so I imagine some other people listening to this would love to see some of the images that you've brought back. Although I imagine the best thing you brought back are the memories and just those moments, and the way you talked about that moment under the surface off the Galapagos Islands. You'll never forget that for the rest of your life.
I'll never forget that. That was just incredible. Yeah.
Okay, what a great example of what this new self-publishing world can do. As it changes publishing, it changes people as well. It's fantastic. Kam, thank you so much indeed for joining us.
All right, thank you very much.
I've really appreciated and enjoyed chatting to you, and thank you very much for the handout, which I think is going to be very useful for people like me who need to get rid of those internal distractions. Yeah,
hopefully it'll be useful for you, because I know you're working on a book right now, right?
I am. I'm plowing through it, and
so you're plowing through it. So that means it's going well.
I don't know. Plowing. I sort of meant it as plowing is quite hard work at the moment. So I've been writing a very extended synopsis of it for quite a long time, and I think I've spoken about this at length in the past, but every time I come to it, I just spend a lot of time rewriting what I've written so far, and I've got to be better, got to be more focused. I am actually making progress at the moment, and I've given myself a deadline for having it published by sort of April next year, so that gives me I need to get it to the editor in the autumn. So I am making progress now.
Well, the fact that you've set a deadline, it's huge, because that's one of the techniques I teach, setting deadlines, and deadlines really help get you a little bit more focused and centers your energy, and it keeps that end date in mind. So you're constantly aware. Okay, I have to get this done by then. So that's good that you at least have a deadline.
Yeah, and I come from a newsroom environment where deadlines ruled our lives, and they worked. They got stuff done. So
yeah.
Kam, again, thank you so much indeed, and we wish you well on your bon voyage, I should say to you.
All right, thank you very much.
I told you he was a lovely guy, really quite softly spoken, but somebody who's obviously just had these amazing moments. He described that, I mentioned it again at the end of the interview, that moment when he was just under the surface in the Galapagos Islands, and this what's a collective noun for sharks? I guess a school, because they're fish, aren't they?
I guess so, yes.
School of hammerhead.
A murder of sharks.
Murder, that's a crows, surely. A school of hammerhead sharks appears, and they're the most weird-looking creatures anyway, to see them on a TV documentary, let alone be in the water with 9 or 10 of them swimming around you, and they're curious. I mean, and that's been unlocked for him. What's been unlocked for you, Mark, by self-publishing?
Well, being asked to go and speak in Bali in January, for example. So I'll be going to Bali with Lucy, and going to New York, going to Denver, going to Boston in the next 6 weeks or so. I mean, also just the ability. I am absolutely. You may not be able to tell, but I am really tired at the moment. I've had. It's been a very, very hard week. I can't. Speaking of focus, I've had a very, very difficult focus this morning, just because I'm so tired. So I'm actually going to go home and have a sleep. I've got a meeting at 3 till 4, and then we're going to go have a sleep, because we're doing a webinar tonight, which means that I won't be in bed again until midnight. So, but to be able to do that and not to have to, remember when we were working together, to have to struggle through watching a film or other stuff, and then get the train home to Salisbury, and then kind of crawl back into the house, to be able to be the master of my own schedule as I am right now is pretty cool. To see the kids and all those amazing things that we're able to do now.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I think it's a very subtle thing that when you're working in that kind of 9-to-5 environment, which we were, there were days when you just didn't fancy. You really, really, the last thing in the world you wanted to do was to get out of bed, get on the train, go in. And I think when you do that relentlessly, particularly if you're not particularly enjoying it, it's really bad for your health for a start. And the subtle difference about working from home, and I can talk about this because although I'm not a successful self-published author, I have successfully left the 9-to-5 and run my own businesses from a shed in the garden, which is the same result, really. The fact that you can, frankly, have a lie-in, have a nap occasionally, pace your life much more healthily around you. And I'm quite happy to work into the evening, so I'm a bit of a night bird, which doesn't really suit, the BBFC where we used to work, or many other companies. And that, it sounds small, but for me, just tuning into your body a little bit more and working like that is a huge difference. But so it was funny when Lucy set up that interview, and she was raving about it just from having a couple of conversations with Kam, and I can see why now. And he started off, he's quite quietly spoken, but I thought it was a really, really lovely interview to listen to. And we all need that every now and again, don't we? A little glimpse into what can be if we get this bit right.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, no, I agree. And now one thing we're thinking about doing later this year is a few more kind of lifestyle videos that we'll put on our YouTube channel, just to, what's possible these days as doing what we do. So watch this space for a little bit more like that from us.
Yeah. Actually, ConvertKit recently did a crowd-sourced book, which I haven't got yet, but it's exactly
I am a blogger.
Yeah, I'm a blogger.
Yes,
Did you?
I've seen that. I haven't seen it, but I knew they were doing it.
Well, it's not out yet, so I did contribute, and actually I've bought a copy of it and the crowdfunding thing for my daughter, and she should pass it to her son, to my son, her brother, because I don't want her to be trapped in a 9-to-5 if she doesn't want to do that. I want her to understand that you're growing, because schools are slow to adapt, right? Schools and universities are not going to be preaching any of the stuff we're talking about. They're going to be talking about the traditional industries and traditional type of job, and the careers guidance person you're going to see is not going to say, oh, don't worry about that, just go on the internet and start a business. But I want her to understand that there are alternatives for her.
Yeah, absolutely. Things are, when I was, I remember when I did when I was 14 or 15, I went to the careers guidance counsellor at school, and there was a questionnaire I had to fill out, and I think it came back something like bin man for me. I'm not kidding. Something like bin man. So so that was, and then of course I was a lawyer, but to think about what we do now, which is basically kind of create money and an income and a business from the stuff that floats around in our head, whether that be what we're doing right now, podcasting, courses, community building, that kind of thing, or writing books. It's fairly remarkable that that's possible, and more than possible. Not easy, but within reach for most people these days.
Yeah, you realise from now on, whenever we're in a room together, I'm going to ask you to empty the bins and take them out.
Well, it's
But you're quite good at it, actually, quite thorough.
I am very good.
And don't forget that you need focus and concentration, of course, to make this lifestyle work and to happen. And you can learn more about that, some tips from the man himself, from Kam, if you go to selfpublishingformula.com/focus, FOCUS. And also Kam promises to include a link there to the photographs from his travels, because he talked in really vivid detail about some of those experiences. It would be great to see some of those photographs as well. Good. That is it. Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to be absolutely shattered next week as we get back after flying around the world, and then we have our annual general meeting, which does involve a nice hotel and meal, but is also going to be us planning the next year. One afternoon.
Yeah, it's going to be busy.
Yeah, it's going to be busy, but we love it, so we're not going to complain. Good. Mark, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, James.
Thank you very much indeed for listening. Have a great week writing and a great week marketing your books, and we'll speak to you next Friday. Bye-bye.
You've been listening to the Self-Publishing Formula podcast. Visit us at selfpublishingformula.com for more information, show notes, and links on today's topics. You can also sign up for our free video series on using Facebook ads to grow your mailing list. If you've enjoyed the show, please consider leaving us a review on iTunes. We'll see you next time.